Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite gadgets in the world, and that's the teleconverter, specifically the Sigma 1.4 teleconverter. Now, I've been shooting sports for a little while now, and I'm constantly surprised at how many new sports shooters are reluctant to use a teleconverter. And if you've ever shot sports before or wildlife, you know that you're constantly looking for more reach. No matter how long your lens is, it never seems to be long enough. But especially when you're first starting out, most of us, our first serious lens that we get is a 70 to 200. And when you're trying to shoot a sport like football, soccer, baseball, it's just not a long enough lens to get the reach that you want. And a teleconverter is a great way to give you that extra reach. Now, I had said that I'm surprised at how many people don't use a teleconverter, and I guess I shouldn't be, because when I first started out, I was the same way. I got on the internet forums, I looked around, and I saw all of these people saying teleconverters suck, they make your images soft, they slow down your autofocus, this and that, and it pretty much scared me from buying one. And then as I started getting more serious into wildlife photography, I started finding out that a lot of these guys that are shooting for the big magazines, that are getting book covers and things like that with their images, those images were shot using a teleconverter. And so I thought, if the top wildlife photographers in the world are consistently using teleconverters, then why am I not using one? And so I bought this Sigma 1.4 EX DG APO. That is a mouthful to say, like everything that Sigma makes. It's always got a crazy name. And I started using it, and I like it. Now, do I lose some image quality using the teleconverter? Yes, I do. If you look at imaging scores for the Sigma teleconverter, whether it's the Canon or the Nikon mount on a Sigma lens, you tend to lose about 10 to 15% of the sharpness using it. And you think, oh, I can't afford to lose any sharpness. Well, the other alternative when you're shooting sports or wildlife is coming up short and having to crop that image heavily. Now, when you crop the image, you're losing image data, and you're going to lose sharpness, and it's just going to become an issue. So I would much rather lose 10 to 15% of the sharpness, keep all that image data in there, not have to crop heavily, because in my opinion it's a better, more usable image. Now, there are limitations besides the sharpness when you use a teleconverter. One of those is that you're going to lose a stop of light with a 1.4 teleconverter, and you're going to lose 2 stops of light with a 2x teleconverter. So if you're shooting with a f2.8 lens, it will effectively become an f4 lens with a 1.4 teleconverter. If you're shooting with a 2x teleconverter, your f2.8 lens will become f5.6. Now, with Sigma lenses, most of them are zoom lenses, so primarily talking about a 70 to 200 or a 120 to 300, those lenses are a little bit soft when you shoot them wide open. So if you stop them down without the teleconverter on, you're going to get some of that image sharpness back. So when you put the teleconverter on, it's like a magnifying glass, so that image sharpness does tend to get a little bit magnified. So the same effect takes place. If you stop that lens down from f4 to f5.6, you're going to get a lot of that sharpness back. So you've got to understand those limitations. Now, as far as autofocus, I've used both the Canon and the Sigma teleconverters pretty extensively. The Canon one, I'll be honest, it performs great. It focuses fast. I don't see very much loss of image quality when I use the Canon teleconverter. Now, granted, I use that in combination with the Canon 300mm lens, which is super sharp, wide open, and it's a fast focusing lens. With the Sigma teleconverter, I do see a slight slowdown in the autofocus, and I also have run into a few problems here. There are not very many, but on occasion, situations where I felt like the lens should focus and it struggled to, especially with backlit subjects. It runs into problems. Now, this isn't an all-the-time situation. It's not enough for me to say, oh, I'm not going to use this. I'm talking out of thousands of images. I've run into that situation a couple of times where I felt like it should autofocus and it wouldn't. And in those situations, I've taken the teleconverter off, and sure enough, the lens was able to focus without it. So it is a little bit of an issue. It does slow down your autofocus slightly, the Sigma 1.4 teleconverter. It's not a huge deal. Unless you are repeatedly shifting from one subject to another to shoot it, it's really not going to be an issue for you. If you're already tracking your subject, to be honest with you, in AI servo mode, I've never run into an issue where it dropped focus and I started missing with shots. The only time I have run into an issue is when I'm shooting sports and I'm rapidly changing between subjects. Sometimes that first shot that I fire off will be out of focus. But that's also a limitation of the lenses. The lenses do take time to acquire autofocus when you're rapidly switching back and forth. Most of the time it's so fast we don't notice it, but because of that microsecond of a delay with the teleconverter, sometimes you think, I probably should have been able to get that shot and I didn't. Now, Sigma has recently released a new teleconverter, and it's a lot more expensive. It's like $500. I don't know how much better it's going to perform than this one, but I'll be honest, I don't have any intentions of buying it right now. From what I read in Sigma's press release that came out recently, the new teleconverter is only it only works with the sport lens, the 120 to 300 at this time, and in order to use it, you have to use the Sigma dock to update the firmware on your 120 to 300 sport. And once you update the firmware, the old teleconverter will no longer work with your lens. So for me, that's kind of an issue because I also shoot with the Sigma 70 to 200 lens, and I don't want to deal with carrying two teleconverters around. I want to be able to have one and switch it back and forth as I need to. Having said all that, if you understand the limitations of a teleconverter, I think that you will be very happy with it, whether it's Canon or Sigma. Now, one of the things you do want to make sure is that you do not cross-brand, does that make sense, your teleconverters. So Canon, Sigma, Nikon, they all recommend that you don't use a different brand teleconverter with their lenses. And a lot of people who have tried and people who've done some imaging scores, they say that they don't work very well together. You run into a lot of problems with your autofocus system if it'll work at all. And you also tend to see a large loss of image quality when you use a different brand teleconverter with a different lens. So I've never personally tried it, but I would highly recommend using the teleconverter designed for the brand lens that you have. But if you're looking for more reach, like most of us who shoot sports and wildlife are, I really highly recommend that you get a teleconverter. I mean, heck, if you can afford to go out and buy the next biggest lens that there is, because that's the reach you need, more power to you, you will be very happy. But unfortunately, I am poor and I can't afford to do that. So this is the poor man's way to get some extra reach. So hopefully that helps you out. You guys can take a look at some of these sample images that I've shot with the 70 to 200 and the 120 to 300 under a lot of different shooting circumstances, but I only use the teleconverter during the daytime because of the light issue. So that's the reason why you don't see any low light images out in this gallery. But hopefully that answered some questions for you, and if you have any questions, leave me a comment below. Thanks for watching.